lawfully allowed to carry one. This is the worst time in his life.
This is the worst time in his life? Not the moments after shooting an unarmed teen, but the moments after acquittal? At least he still has a life to live. Joining me now, Jason Johnson, political science professor at Hiram University and chief political correspondent for Politic365.com. He joins us tonight from Atlanta, Georgia. Jason, thanks so much for being back inside the war room. I want to ask you, Jason, the verdict seems to have taken many Americans by surprise. I want to ask you first and foremost, were you surprised?
No, I wasn't surprised. I mean, look, if demographics are destiny, the idea that 5 Southern white women would say it's okay for someone to be afraid of and shoot a young black teen isn't surprising. I also didn't think the prosecution did a particularly good job. And American history shows us that this is the kind of behavior that can often be excused or justified under the law. You've got Fruitvale Station coming out in a week. I mean, it's not like this is new. So I wasn't particularly surprised by the verdict at all.
Yeah, and Fruitvale Station is the documentary based upon a shooting of a police officer, a BART shooting here in the San Francisco area of another unarmed teen. Now, tell me something, Jason. Do you think the reaction would have been different had there been a guilty verdict? And if so, what would that reaction be?
I think it would have been similar. I think if George Zimmerman had been found guilty, I don't think people would have been celebrating. I still think there would have been marches in the streets. There would have been vigils because a 17-year-old boy died. I said this long before the verdict. First off, nothing I believe about America was going to be affected. What I think how this country works wouldn't matter if it was an innocent or a guilty verdict.
But I want to stop you there. I want to stop you there, Jason, because that to me, I totally understand what you're saying, and it's a totally compelling fact. I mean, we talk about the progress of race. Jim Crow laws obviously gone. We have a black man in the White House, but I mean, this is no different than the goddamn Emmett Till trial. You see these fat guys sitting in the front row saying, with big smirks, and they got away with it again, and then we just get back to our life again. So what happens now from this moment? I mean, and that was a long time ago. That was the mid-50s, 1956, 57, if I'm not mistaken. So what happens now, Jason? I mean, where do we go from here? If this is what you're accustomed to, if this is what you think is going to happen, what now?
Well, there's very little that's going to happen, and that's the unfortunate reality. I mean, first and foremost, George Zimmerman's going to go live the rest of his life in relative obscurity. Once he's no longer valuable to the right, they're not going to send him any money. He's going to end up poor and destitute and hiding like Monica Lewinsky. And for every other African-American male in this country, it's par for the course. Your life can be in danger, no matter how well-spoken you are, how educated you are, how nice you behave, and how well you dress. The likelihood that any laws are going to be changed. People forget that last year, after the Trayvon Martin shooting, several red states actually passed and enhanced stand your ground laws as a way to sort of thumb in the eye to the civil rights groups who are calling for George Zimmerman's arrest. So I don't see much change happening. Conversations will happen. People will be upset. People of all colors will be upset. But I don't see anything radically changing that'll make someone like George Zimmerman or anyone else who thinks like him behave differently in the future.
Well, let's go to what you just said, people of all colors. I think one of the warming things that we've seen in the wake of this is that people of all colors have turned out to protest this, have been offended, not just by the verdict, but by the fact that these laws exist. And let's not forget that. I mean, the verdict, that was a case, that was a trial. Maybe they didn't even prove it. We can talk about that in a moment. But the law that does exist is so offensive to so many people. Do you think there's something encouraging there?
Well, you know what? I would have said that in the state of Florida until about 2 weeks ago, when the Supreme Court got rid of pre-clearance. So the likelihood, remember, this is Florida, the state where the head of the Republican Party came out earlier this year and said, we passed voter ID to keep black people and young people and Latinos from voting. And now the Supreme Court says that they don't have to have pre-clearance, which means they can change any kind of voter laws that they want, and the federal government can't automatically stop them from doing so. So the likelihood that the ballot box is going to lead to any fundamental changes in that state are very, very slim. And that is a disappointing, harsh reality from this case.
Yeah, and that's true. It's another one of the byproducts of this case. Let's talk about the case itself. Was this a failure by the prosecution? You alluded to it earlier. Or were the laws written such that it was nearly impossible to convict Zimmerman? Personally, I thought they were going to get him on manslaughter.
I thought they might. Here's the thing. There were two ways to look at this realistically. Either one, you thought demographics are destiny, which is the chance of 5 white women, giving you a conviction are slim. But if you assume that they could be persuadable, it would have taken, you would have had to have like Sam Waterston from LA, Law and Order, and Matthew McConaughey from A Time to Kill with the ghost of Johnny Cochran advising them. They would have had to put on the perfect prosecution in order to convince this demographic of a jury with the kind of laws they were facing, with the burden they faced, in order to get a conviction. So the laws didn't work against them, and they had a very, very small margin of error. I mean, when you mix the fact that the local police were trying to torpedo the case, I think they were kind of doomed from the start, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's really that is part of the problem here, and part of the fact that it was doomed. And I think a lot of us secretly believed that it was, even though we thought we'd see justice. Today, Newt Gingrich from the fantastic state of Georgia, where you sit tonight, actually compared the peaceful protesters to a lynch mob. And I'm not kidding, and this is 2013, attacking Zimmerman. Take a listen to the former Speaker of the House.
So I watched these protesters, none of whom read the transcript, none of whom sat through 5 weeks of the trial, all of whom were prepared basically to be a lynch mob. They only wanted one verdict, and the verdict was guilty.
All right, so as a party, the Republicans turned Gingrich away last year. He is a deposed whatever he is. But what do statements like these say about the state of race relations in this country, or is he anomalous?
Well, I don't think well, here's the thing. Newt Gingrich is an anomaly because he speaks out loud. And what I think is really interesting is that the people who are in favor of George Zimmerman are very, very quiet today, because they know even the majority of white Americans think something about this isn't clean. There is a difference between law and justice. And I think that most Americans think that somehow, some way, justice did not manifest itself in this case. So you're always going to have those Newt Gingriches. But there are other concerns. Joe Scarborough wrote this morning in Politico saying this was wrong. Joe Scarborough. So I don't think that this is just as simple as right-wing, left-wing. I think the vast majority of Americans think a mistake was made here, and I think that's a sign of progress, probably the only sign of progress we can see from this case.
Yeah, and of course we remember that Joe Scarborough represented Florida in the House of Representatives. He is a Floridian, and I think that's true. And I think it's a really, really interesting point you make about Gingrich really being one of the few people that actually speaks their mind and is able to say this and is given a mic. So that means there are a lot of Newt Gingriches out there. Very quickly, today Zimmerman's attorney, Mark O'Mara, said his client never would have been tried if he was black. And then there was an editorial, as you said, in the Wall Street Journal making essentially the same argument. It says, quote, nationally, nearly half of all murder victims are black, and the overwhelming majority of those black people are killed by other black people. Where is the march for them? Tell me quickly what you make of that.
It's disingenuous nonsense. The fact of the matter is you have marches in Chicago all the time. No one is happy about death. And that's the basic reality of this. And actually, had this been a black man who shot a black boy, he probably would have gone to jail. And George Zimmerman was given the benefit of the doubt because he wasn't African American, because his victim was African American. And if you look at the frontline PBS research from last year, the safest person to be in America is a white person who shoots a black guy, because the likelihood of you going to jail, the likelihood that people are going to believe your self-defense claim is 250% higher than a black man in the same position.
An astonishing number. Jason Johnson, thanks as always for joining us to talk about this. Coming up on the show, give them hell, Harry. The majority leader throws down with Mitch